get started, and you've heard some of our past conversations. I don't typically do a full bio. I don't really like to read out from your LinkedIn or a bio. People can do that. But what I'd like to start with is, before we go all over the timeline and the whys and the purpose, how would you describe what you do now as a business?
So I'm passionate about helping people essentially live their best life and, finding the ease in whatever they're doing. And so I do that, helping them understand and participate using tools to build resilience. And it's a sweet spot for me.
And what's the name of your business?
So it's Barb, Fletcher and Associates.
Okay.
And I'm a certified heart math coach and trainer, and have pulled in a series of other tools that I've gathered over my career, which now spans almost 40 years.
So maybe even just for the people who might not understand, can you define what heart math is?
Yeah, so heart math is really about emotional self-regulation, emotional awareness, and we go through our days experiencing all kinds of emotions, making all kinds of decisions, and we may not even be aware of it. And so people will perhaps be going along and all of a sudden have a really strong reaction. Could be a negative one. And then they will look at the situation and say, I don't understand why that happened. I really wasn't that angry or that frustrated. And what's happened in those cases is that people have been experiencing emotions all along. And it's, I liken it to a bottle of soda, which we've got the top on, and we give it a good shake every time we add a little bit more emotion to it. And then all of a sudden, we try and loosen the top, but sometimes there's no loosening it. It just comes out. And so the tools that they learn in working with me that are research-based, more than 40 years, help people understand those emotions and actually work with them throughout all of their lives. And that's really why I was so interested in these tools, is that, it's nice for us to have tools, wellness tools, emotion tools, meditation, all of those kinds of things. But we need tools that we can use 24/7, no matter where we are. So, if we're in a meeting and we're feeling anxious, we need a tool for that. If we arrive home after a busy day and we've got chaos and kids going on, we need tools for that. If we wake up in the middle of the night because we're worried about what tomorrow's going to look like, we need a tool for that. So it's, a lot of what people have been given has been compartmentalized. It's a yoga mat, it's meditation, it's all of them are really good. We just need to be more progressive, I think, with what we have in our toolbox.
So you mentioned you also have a long career, but you haven't always been doing this. When would you say that you first identified as an entrepreneur?
Oh, I grew up on a farm, and so there was a lot of entrepreneurial spirit from a very young age, and in fact, being an entrepreneur, I think, followed me when I was a civil servant. I worked for the province for 35 years, and I was the person who, didn't complain about taking my work home, that I could, that I treated it like my own business. And at one point I was managing more than $300 million for all of the nursing homes in the province. So I took that very seriously, and I didn't, I think it's when it's a core value for you, it's who you are. It's hard to deny it. It also is really clear to me now why in those situations some of the qualities of an entrepreneur, why I didn't fit as well as I might have.
So when did you, so you did 35 years. When is it and why did you transition to doing your own thing?
So 3.5 years ago, I was at a place in my life where I was going to be um, offered an opportunity to go back deep in the civil service, or my other option was to leave. And so at that point, after a long career, I decided that I needed to spread my wings, and the time seemed right. And so I had been preparing and doing some entrepreneurial work alongside of my civil service career, which made the transition pretty smooth. And actually it was one where I was really excited to move into.
So it sounds like, from what I'm hearing and what I've talked with you a little bit before, that in your role as a civil servant, you were given a really interesting opportunity to be a leader and more entrepreneurial. I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about how that came about and how it influenced yourself.
So I think, so I spent 15 years in nursing home services, and that, I was close to the caring field, which was really, really important to me. What I didn't understand at the time was the need to understand what was really happening in my physical body. And so I then began to present with some stress symptoms. I experienced TMJ, and for, I saw a dentist regularly, and actually he gave me a bite plane, and I was feeling pretty successful when I chewed through the third one. And at that point, he said, the next step is for us to break your jaw. And I thought, okay, maybe it's time I took a little more responsibility for what I'm experiencing. So I became very appreciative of that imbalance that got created in me, and the I guess the lack of perspective at times when I was throwing myself into my career. And, and I think, when I talk to entrepreneurs today, I think that, many of them in the early stages of building a business, it's easy to lose that solid footing and to keep that balance. So for me, I probably noticed 20 years ago, and then began to gather tools along the way that I use daily.
So I kind of want to like double click a little bit on the, as you started to take on and build your entrepreneurial self while still a civil servant. I know a lot of people who, it's not always civil service. It's, in whatever job that they've had, and it's their career, it's their education, and they aren't fulfilled, or something's not working, and they want to, a lot of people wait until the point where they have to just quit, or they blow up and then they have to go a completely different path. And I loved it. Like, look at the specific practical ways that people start doing other things. So if you put yourself back to whether it was 15 or 20 years ago, when you're starting the very first steps of doing your own thing outside of work, like, what's the first thing you sold? What's the first client you had? And how did that feel, and how did you go through that?
So the first client I had was really myself. It was for me to build that resiliency, to become well and model it. And so then I began to speak to people, and some of it might have been employees that I would have worked with, that I didn't actually get paid for the practice that I was delivering, but I had people reporting to me. So it was an opportunity for me to lead by example. And then as I moved along, I was able to share with people that I had an expertise and was able to help people. And so, I played around with individuals who were struggling, early on, it was primarily word of mouth. I worked with EMTs and with nurses. So people who were in the same vein as what I was, and recognized the need to be well.
I love and it comes up fairly frequently, but I love just bringing it out there that the audience of one is such a great reason to start an entrepreneurial venture, whether it's a business or a project. But like all of the things I've been involved in, the first thing was that I wanted it and I couldn't find it. And it just made, everything else makes much more sense.
Well, it's really difficult to relate to others if it's not deeply rooted within us, and so we want to connect and empathize and understand other people's challenges or problems, to share with them our expertise, and if we don't believe in it, if it's not who we are.
Yeah, for sure. So here's the question. Like I haven't prepared you for this, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
That's good.
But it's been a conversation that I've been having with a number of people in our social media feeds. How would you define entrepreneurship?
I think entrepreneurship. I think is at our core being. I think it's our desire to innovate. I think it's our desire to be independent. I think it's our desire to impact change for what we believe is our highest good. Yeah, and I think there's an independence that goes along with that. It's our ability to create a vision. Yeah, those are more elements as opposed to a definition. But
yeah, so the reason I have and I'm trialing the question for the first time with you, but I plan on researching this a little bit more, is because I think that I agree with everything you just said. Define somebody who is pure or who's really entrepreneurial, but I find a lot of people aren't giving them the credit that where they started becoming an entrepreneur, having entrepreneurship versus entrepreneurial, is when you, instead of just feeling the desire to, you did. And that implementation step of actually going forward and making something happen, I think that's an important component. I love, like, and you'll notice I talk about some of the questions about, what are the actual steps you took? When did you take a want and a need and a why and a purpose and made it a thing? So I love the fact that you had a career, you could have retired, and you chose to do more. You chose to take on a project, and I think that you had a strong why that led you to that. So I'm playing around with that. We're experimenting a little bit, but I enjoy that conversation of understanding a bit more about what makes the entrepreneur tick. So going back to, we're pragmatic, so I'm going to go back to a little bit more practical things. I'm curious about like your business today. We are still in the late stages of a global pandemic. How have you managed to build the business around yourself? Because you are, the casual term would be solopreneur, like the business is you. You're selling yourself and your tools and your experience. How have you built a business or structure around you, and how do you manage that?
So I was in a good position prior to the pandemic because I had been using virtual platforms to coach. And so that wasn't, it was an easy transition into pandemic. And in fact, being able to work with people from the convenience of their own home at a time that's flexible for them has really been, it's been an advantage when people think that they can't do something, and we can present it in a way that it's really easy. So as a solopreneur, my clients find me by networking. So networking has become virtual, and whether, it's connecting with people. And you and I spoke earlier about, these conversations, whether we have them by reaching out to you or podcasts, or, perhaps even other professionals that are doing something that may not specifically relate, but we know that they have that pain point. And so having that conversation. So I haven't done a lot of advertising. Most of what I've done is I've been successful at word of mouth and referrals, because people are getting such relief, such positive change in their lives, that they become your raving fans, and that's the best we could hope for.
So what does the future look like for you? What's the, when you think about your business anyway, what do you picture?
So there's no question that I would love to connect with more people. The sweet spot is always the one-on-one coaching. At the same time, these platforms make it easy to do training. And so I would see that within the next year, the ability to bring together organizations and groups to deliver new understanding, deeper understanding about how people can make stress not necessarily a negative experience, but something that they can work with if they have the right tools.
So one of the conversations we had is, like, especially you mentioned organizations and the importance now of being more intentional in designing the work-life balance, the culture, the way that your employees integrate with your company now that the lines are blurred. It's not home and work for a lot of companies, not all. I was wondering if you had any thoughts around, like, how organizations are going to have to work with that, and wellness, and anything around that.
I think if there's one thing that's become more clear to everybody, is that wellness needs to be a core value that's integrated within your organization. It can't be a standalone. For a long time, we've looked at, when I worked for the province, it was EFAP, which is employee family, whatever, assistance programs. But people don't go to that until they're under big stress. So instead of having an upstream intervention, which is where we need to be, the preventative piece, we wait until they get very ill, and then they are then trying to sort themselves out to find a way back. And so I think the wellness piece, the research that's coming out that's showing that when we emerge from this pandemic, we're going to need to pay attention to wellness. I liken, people have had, a finger on them. They've been pushed down during this COVID, and many have done well. But even as we move into a period of time where we're seeing vaccines, my sense is that we're going to let a little bit of that pressure off, a little bit. And what's going to happen is people who may have been strong when there was lots of pressure on them may find some wobbles and are going to need support to build their resilience back, because they've been drained during this past year.
So, not to give away your product, but do you have any, like, if you had a business owners listening or watching this right now, any like tactical tips that they could start looking at right now?
I think they need to help their people who are working understand what stress looks like for them. Not everybody responds the same way to stress. Our typical understanding of stress is fight or flight, but there are others. And my stress response is overcare. And so people would presume that that's a good thing, when in fact it's the way I respond to situations. And there may be people in your organizations that are into that overcare, and they've been caring for friends and family and children and parents, and they view that as the highest good, but they're probably drained. And so that perspective on what stress looks like. And then the other piece is, that deeper understanding that the stress that people are living with, often they bring with them in the morning to work. And, my career began at a time when we suggested to people, park your stress at the door, come through. And I was speaking with an entrepreneur just before I got on this call, and she said, it's never about the work. It's what people are experiencing outside of work. And so we now have to, I believe, figure out ways to support our people, because they're going to show up. They're going to do a better job for us. They're going to be present. Just because they're sitting in their chair doesn't mean they are actually there. And, productivity is going to go up, decision making, it'll become much easier, communication will be better. So a lot of symptoms around what stress can look like, but we attribute it to something else.
So it's funny. I cut my teeth in the hospitality sector, and the saying everywhere was choose your attitude. Come into work and choose your attitude. Restaurants, hospitality is, so I totally get that. Now, I'm only going to double click one more time on this one, because I know I have a lot of conversations that are private with entrepreneurs and business owners. And one of the things, because this is a topic that is being brought up a lot, how do I support my team? How do I do this? Because I don't feel I have the tools. Now, here's one of the things I'm getting that I haven't ever been able to, aside from just do it, as a business owner, how much do you have to do and how much is too much? I know a lot of business owners that are trying to navigate the relationship of employer to employee and the draw on their personal resources in strengthening those relationships. And I was wondering, just from your position of experience on HeartMath and understanding, I know a lot of people struggling with that as an employer. And the line blurs both ways. So it's blurring for the business owner as well as for the teams. And I'd love your thoughts on that.
I think, I don't believe that employers probably have all the tools they need to be able to do this. I think, and I'm not sure that they ever really should want them. I think this is when a third party, somebody helping them create that foundation. Now, they can certainly walk the talk. They can learn the tools with their employees, and that's really important, that they have a strong appreciation for that. But I think, I always say the reason we haven't dealt with emotions is that they're messy. And that's the messiness that employers are probably sitting on the fence. Do I open the conversation about what this looks like for them? What do I do if there's tears? Where do I go from there? What do I do? And so I think, when people have tools, which is what I'm about, then it becomes an easier conversation, and you'll know when it's the right time to refer out, to say, look, this is bigger than something I can do. You'll need to work with somebody else. But I think if you don't have any tools, it's really opening a can of worms sometimes.
Yeah, the first step is usually understanding how much you don't know and being okay with asking for help. I would say that's true of a lot of different challenges. Yeah. I think one of the things I'd like to come out with the speaker series is that business owners don't have it all together. They don't have all the tools. And the expectation that they do often makes it harder to express the fact that they don't. So I love being able to open up and have that conversation. We do have a really relevant audience question that's right along this topic. So I'm just going to read it as it is, just so you can respond directly. Do you have advice for helping someone recognize their own physical symptoms of stress, or helping somebody else recognize those patterns or connections?
For sure. I use a series of tools, some that people can just, a self-assessment tool that they can use, and then some that are, a psychometric. And I think those tools are really important because people may react, but they don't necessarily have the language to understand that some of those emotions, some of the behaviors that they're demonstrating are actually stress related. And so I think using tools to get a solid understanding of that is really helpful, because when we point to somebody and say, you're angry because you're stressed, that becomes very threatening. It's pointing the finger at them. When they do this self-assessment tool, then you can peel it back a little bit at a time so that they can become more comfortable. Maybe it's frustration. Maybe they withdraw. Maybe they don't engage. So it's maybe they demonstrate characteristics around disappointment. They feel unappreciated, but we need to understand what that is and give them some language that resonates with them, then to move forward.
For sure. The another question that's come in, and I had kind of the same one, is you have a long career, and especially the latter part of your career when you started working both as a support in this, what eventually became your business, and as a leader in the civil service. What are some positive or negative things you've seen in how stress was communicated in the workplace? Any real wins or situations that you can share?
I think, I had 35 years. I think the biggest thing when I was working for the civil service, early on, the value was, the longer you stayed, the harder you worked, the more successful you were likely to become. And that's in fact what was rewarded. We didn't understand productivity. When I was leading, one of the things that I always loved to do was I would go to work, 45 minutes early to ensure that at 8:15, I could leave my door open so people could come by and connect. And so I had staff who were very loyal, who were very committed. Now, it was always, as you mentioned, that line of when are you too involved or when are you not. But those people had an expectation of me that I cared and I was involved. And so I think probably, that was one of the best parts of who I was back then. And that's probably one of the reasons I'm so successful now, is that, if you talk to clients, they will tell you that I care. And, if I see something that looks like it's going sideways for them, I'm probably reaching out to see, what I can do.
So overall, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, do you feel like we're improving? Do you think things are getting better?
I think they're changing slowly, but one of the exciting things, as difficult as the pandemic has been, I think the pandemic has provided us with in my lifetime, will be the most pivotal time for us to make the most progress as it relates to well-being, as for employers to understand the importance of well-being. I think we're being forced into it. We have no choice. And so I think that for me is because if you think pre-pandemic, we heard lots of conversations about millennials were maybe not as committed. We had people labeled they didn't work like the boomers did. That's all a wash now. We're not. That's not even a conversation. We're just needing to figure out how do we support everybody in a very different way. And I think the pandemic has been a blessing as it relates to that.
In a lot of the circles I'm in, they use the term "don't waste a good crisis." In a crisis, everything's going to change and be disrupted, so you might as well take the opportunity to put in new and better systems going forward, for sure. One of the questions I like to ask everybody, because I really like to hear the different answers, is looking back, especially since you're fully on your own, you're running this as a business, you're growing it. What has been the most, if I was to ask you, what has been the most exciting moment for you? Does anything come to mind?
I think the exciting moments are really when I see people make big change and have success as an entrepreneur. You know, when I can see people, you know, I was working with a gentleman who, when he arrived, he said, you know, his anger would last 3 days. And a week later, we have a conversation and he said it lasted 30 minutes. And then a week later, he said it lasted 10 minutes and he apologized and never apologized ever before. And then the next session said it didn't even happen because he recognized it was. So it's that profound change that people are able to make, you know, which is the most exciting. You know, certainly hitting financial milestones, when you're putting in the blood, sweat, and tears, that feels good too. Outcomes are pretty special to me.
Great. So the second question that follows up after that is I firmly believe that no entrepreneur has it all together and they make all the kinds of mistakes. I often say that, like, the only reason sometimes we're seen as an expert is we've had the chance to make more mistakes than everybody else. I was wondering if I was to ask you to look back, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, of something that you just created. I can't believe I did that. That seems like such a rookie mistake. Anything jump to mind?
Oh, for sure. About 5 years, I was in not my best place on my own emotional perspective, and I invested in something that I should never have put my head in. And I followed a sales pitch that said, you know, we're going to get you on your feet and move you forward at warp speed. And yeah. And I mean, none of it is horrible. It's just, you think, oh, that really was the rookie mistake. That was me not, you know, and I trust, and I was not in a place of as much discernment as I should have been.
Well, it happens to everybody.
Yeah.
So a couple other questions coming in from the audience that I wanted to tie in. Our team is all virtual, as many companies have the option to be virtual or they're virtual, but we all work from our homes. And I was wondering, somebody on the team's asked this, but I'd love to hear your response on practical advice or tips on how you can separate your work and personal when they're both in the same location. Anything you've seen or heard from your point of view on wellness that they can set themselves up for success?
I think, you know, it's all about having solid practices to, you know, that are integrated into your workday. And so, you know, I was talking with a company, and the employee said to me, you know, I used to be able to get on a plane and fly. And so that I got a break. And now that we're, you know, all working from home, those breaks didn't exist anymore. So the question, you know, it's about how do you create those breaks, those interrupts for yourself, whether it's scheduling or whether it's, you know, sometimes people, you know, when I walk through this door, I make a commitment that I leave whatever it is behind. I don't have the market cornered on that because I'm afraid that I sometimes will start a client at 7:30 and I may still be doing another client later at night. Now, all that to say that it's not that 14, 16-hour workday. I've been able to take some breaks in between. But I think it's that consciousness of an activity, and one of the, some of the tools that we do are really good at creating that shift and that reset. So if you're resetting to move into family time, how does that look?
Mm-hmm.
If you're resetting to take a lunch break, what does that look like? And it's more difficult. It takes some discipline and some habit building to create that, but there are ways for sure.
It's really, and now looking back, so in looking at your example, the one thing that I don't have that I really missed pre-pandemic was my drive time. I would have 6 to 10 hours a week of driving to client sites and to different cities to do work. And that sounds like it's a huge pain, but I got so much really interesting podcast time. So it's not even the driving, it's the time where I could not do anything else, where I got amazing content and stories and TED Talks, and I really got into it. And it's just not the same. It's really hard for me to take an hour break and listen to a podcast because there's always so many other things to do. And I think as I heard you talk, I think what's happened is that what it took for me to get that same like absolute break from the day to concentrate on really interesting conversations, I had to create a podcast. So I think that this has become this for me is as a roundabout way. I just think it's kind of a funny connection, but I think that's, I don't have it figured out at all, but I think it's very true.
It's ironic, and I think what I think what's going to be important is that everybody finds their own podcast or their own niche that they can help with that transition. Because without that, people will run out of steam.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like how true it is. I found like, so for me, it's a really busy day. I've switched into like our suppers have got very elaborate. Like there's risottos and there's African dishes. And I was a chef as my first trade. So it helps that that's my safe space. But there are some remarkable meals coming in for a table of two. But everybody needs that real thing that they can concentrate on that isn't work, for sure.
Yeah, I think, and it takes focus and purpose and habits to do it. But I'm reading a book called Tiny Habits, and it's a fabulous book that helps us break up the queuing, and I would recommend it to anybody, because I think the pivoting that we need to do right now, we're going to need those subtle cues that only you know what they are.
For sure. I have another question coming in. And I grew up on a 7-generation dairy farm, and like farming and food and beverage is a big part of my past. And somebody's asked the question, what do you currently trace back to your roots? Like of your success today, what could be traced back to growing up on a farm, do you think?
I think my dad would say it was work ethic. And like you, we raised broiler chickens. And so it was 7 days a week, 24/7 that you needed to be. But it was also about serving, doing for others, from a community standpoint. So I think, and certainly, the independence of making your own decisions, making choices, that I spent 35 years where other people made a lot of the choices. I got to make some, but the vision was not always mine, where I think now my dad might have been 75 still buying tractors. And, even though, so it's that continuous purpose and passion that it was not in me to ever think about retiring. It just, there was more to do.
Small tangent, but my aunt just put up a photo of my grandfather at 74 driving a tractor in the hayfield, and mirrored next to a photo in the same field of him driving it at 21. And he had the same position. He was sitting the same way. It was just wild to see that kind of, not that I would ever, it's just not me, but.
No, and nor was it me to commit to that 7-day a week experience. I that wasn't going to be a good fit for me. But I think there were some threads that got woven into probably each of us that have created us.
There's probably, like, it's harder to complain about some smaller things when you think back to some of the things. Like, well, I'll speak from my point of view. It's hard for me to complain about some difficult situations, having seen some of the ones I grew up with around work and like lack of vacation, and like, so it's hard for, like, I think it's an understanding of how we want to be better and more healthy, but that we have it pretty good. It's a gratitude and an understanding of contentment of how good we have it, even as we continue to try to improve.
Yeah, and I think for me, what it's become is a deeper understanding to some degree that some of those behaviors and ways that we had didn't always serve people as well as, because we weren't having the conversations.
No.
My dad viewed that if somebody was going for a run, and I mean, this is 40 years ago. If somebody was going for a run on the road to be fit, he would have suggested that they didn't have enough to do. There was probably more work that could be done. So, the pendulum's swung a little bit.
For sure. So I had an interesting question, and I'll paraphrase a little bit. You talked about like employers and teams and organizations and building those best practices and habits. As a peer, as somebody on a team of other people where you don't really have, a reporting relationship, where you don't really have the right to go and talk to them about their daily habits. Any suggestions if you see like a mood or a mindset on the team that might be impacting everybody else, of how, as a peer, you could work towards helping that situation?
I think it always, of course, is tricky because, we're not always in an open place to receive that kind of information. I think it's always better if we can relate our own situation and something that we may have done and something that may have worked for us, and make it about us as opposed to the other person. One of the values of the work I do around HeartMath is there's tools and a language that people can use to share with one another, to say, let's do this and this will help. And so if everybody has the same language, then it becomes less threatening. Certainly being able to be in an active listening perspective is helpful. And then we have because there is a laundry list of things that people can do to be well. But when we're deep under it, we often can't find our way there.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're aligned in this. I really enjoy reading and absorbing really great content to shift my perspective and allow me to grow. And there's a lot of not so great information out there, and there's some really great nuggets of gold. So I was wondering, you've already mentioned a really great recommendation in Tiny Habits, but are there any other books, podcasts, or information sources that you recommend often, and whether it's about your subject matter expertise, but also you as growing your business? Like, what have you seen as inspirations?
So one of the things that I've done is I work with a coach, mentor, who's an entrepreneur, and she actually has a book club, a business book club. And so that has challenged, and we do one book a month. And what I've found is I've read books that I would never have picked up. I've had conversations that I would never have had. And so I think, you know, when we're fatigued and when we're pressed, it's difficult for us again to find options. So I think sometimes it's surrounding yourself with, you know, perhaps a like-minded, an innovator, somebody who can help build you up. That, you know, for me, you know, I'm constantly like you, reading and looking for those little niches where I can throw my earbuds in and listen to training or podcasts or whatever. You know, I am recently just nudging my way into Clubhouse to listen there, and there are so many options and communities to find new information to inspire us.
Yeah, I've heard lots about Clubhouse. I'm not an Apple person, so it's right now
Okay.
it prevents us from joining, which makes me want to join less personally. But
Yes, of
I've heard
course,
really
of
interesting
course.
conversations are happening.
Yeah, and it's I've, you know, I haven't spent hours, but I've spent a bit of time and enough to discern what feels good and what doesn't, and what things will add value and what things don't.
Mm. So as we've gone through the conversation, is there anywhere that we haven't gone or any topics that you want to make sure that you talk about today?
I think we talked a little bit about how important it's going to be for employers as we come to a change in our pandemic perspective, and that's one that really I think is so important, because I think we need to have a good understanding of how well our employees are doing and what they might need to move forward, and the need to make sure that we have the wellness woven into our new way of being. And you know, I don't think that there's a blueprint for that. I think every organization and every situation will be different, and I think that whatever you choose to do, you need to make sure that it takes into consideration your culture and the way your organization thrives, as opposed to, you know, here's the plan, fit in.
Yeah. When you get people involved, nothing is ever a simple plan. So it's better to just plan for people, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'd like to thank you very much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I hope you did as well.
Thank you. I did. It's a delight.
So we're going to go back down to the floor, and I know that some of my team would love to follow up and continue the conversation if you have the time.
I do.
Great. So thank you very much. We'll see you soon.